Good evening and welcome to tonight's Bible study. Um, Tomorrow is Christmas Eve, and for those of y'all who attend either Ottertail or Richville, tomorrow at 5 we will be doing Ottertail, and at 6:30 we will be doing Richville Christmas Eve service. Um, we have worked our way up to Proverbs 29. I will read it and then I will discuss it. Um, Verse 1 reads, "Whosoever remains stiff-necked after many rebukes will suddenly be destroyed without remedy. When the righteous thrive, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. A man who loves wisdom brings joy to his father, but a companion of prostitutes squander his wealth. By justice a king gives a community stability, but those who are greedy for bribes tear it down. Those who flatter their neighbors are spreading nets at their feet. Evildoers are snared by their own sin, but the righteous shout for joy and are glad. The righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern. Mockers stir up a city, but the wise turn away anger. If a wise person goes to court with a fool, the fool rages and scoffs, and there is no peace. The bloodthirsty hates a person of integrity and will seek to kill the upright. Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end. If a ruler listens to lie, all his officials become wicked. The poor and the oppressed have this in common: the Lord gives sight to the eyes of both. If a king judges the poor with fairness, his throne will be established forever. A rod and a reprimand imparts wisdom, but a child left undisciplined disgraces its mother. When the wicked strive, so does sin, but the righteous will see their downfall. Discipline your children, and they will give you peace. They will bring you the delight you desire. Where there is no revelation, people cast off restraint, but blessed is the one who heeds wisdom instructions. Servants cannot be corrected by mere words. Though they understand, they will not respond. Do you see someone who speaks in haste? There is more hope for a fool than for them. A servant pampered from youth will turn out to be insolent. An angry person stirs up conflict, and a hot-tempered person commits many sins. Pride brings a person low, but the lowly in spirit gains honor. The accomplices of thieves are their own enemies. They are put under oath and dare not testify. Fear of a man will prove to be a snare, but whosoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. Many seek an audience with the ruler, but it is from the Lord that one gets justice. The righteous detest the dishonest. The wicked detest the upright. Many things in these. Some of them are repeat, as we have seen. For example, verse 2, it says, "When the righteous strive, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan." That's a theme that we have seen over and over again. If you have good leaders, things go well. If you have bad leaders, things go bad. I don't know how else to explain that. Leadership is so important. And we know this for a fact. I don't know how many of y'all have ever seen a sports team that is losing. Do you notice they never fire the players? What they do is they fire the coach, bring in a new leader who train them and then all of a sudden that team start winning. The same thing at work. You have people who are a company that's doing badly, and you hire new management or somebody, they sell it and some new manager come in and it turns around. The same is true for the church. I don't know if you have ever been to a church that was declining or growing. And the truth is, a church is always declining or growing. So is business, so is everything. Under good leadership, the church grows. Under bad leadership, the church declines. And I want for us to understand when the righteous thrive, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. When you have good leaders, righteous, upright, God-fearing people who are good leaders, the church grows, life is good. When you have bad leaders, the church goes down. Let's go back to verse 1. It says, whoever remains stiff-necked after many rebuke will suddenly be destroyed without remedy. And what this is talking about is a person who refused to listen to instruction, to constructive criticism. And they are what the Bible calls stiff-necked. They're hard-headed. They don't want to listen to anybody. It's their way and their opinions only. And it says, whosoever remains stiff-necked after many rebuke, after they've been told numerous times, eventually people will give up, not tell them anymore, and they will suddenly be destroyed because they're going to run into problems and they're going to be destroyed. Verse 3 reads, a man who loves wisdom brings joy to his father, but a companion of prostitute squanders his wealth. And what an apt saying for, I don't know how many of you have kids, and I want to spend some time on kids today. I know it's almost Christmas, and the question is, how do we treat our kids? And how our kids grow up is important. It says, a man who loves wisdom brings joy to his father, but a companion of prostitutes squanders his wealth. And the whole idea is, what do our kids do after us? Over and over again in the Bible, especially in the early history of Israel, we saw that after every generation or so, there were ups and downs, and up and down. There was a new ruler and a new judge, and the people sinned, and then God sent a new judge. The people did well, and there's this cyclical thing. But I think part of it is, if we look at history and do some studying of history, we see it's not only Israel, it's America, it's Europe, it's Africa. All nations go through this. And quite often, I have to say that the problem is the parents. It's not the kids, it's the parents. And let me talk about this some more, and I'll skip around and skip to a few verses. Verse 15, for example, it says, a rod and a reprimand imparts wisdom, but a child left undisciplined disgraces its mother. Quite often, and I know especially, this is true, we love our kids. I know I love my kids. I want what's best for my kids, and I'm sure you do too. You love your kids, you love your grandkids, and you want what's best for them. But sometimes we don't discipline them because we love them. And the Bible is reminding us that kids need discipline. And I'm not talking about corporal punishment. Let's be realistic. Back then, a rod was a thing to whack a kid with, and a reprimand imparts wisdom. And I don't know if you have any stories, about a little nun that beat your knuckles or would beat you when you were in kids. I know it's America. I grew up in Belize, and I went to a Catholic school and an Anglican school, and I had a little nun, and she beat me. But the whole point is not the beating. For today, those things hopefully don't happen, but to reprimand somebody, to correct somebody when they need correcting, brings and imparts wisdom. Unfortunately, a lot of parents want to be friends with their kids rather than parents. And, we leave our kids, and I have to say, this is even worse for grandparents. We can spoil them and then send them back to parents, is the old saying. But here's the thing. A child left undisciplined disgraces its mother. Skipping down to verse 17. Discipline your children, and they will give you peace. They will bring you delight, the delight you desire. Here's the thing. Nobody likes to discipline anybody else. I know when I became the supervisor, one of the hardest things for me to do was to discipline a subordinate or a worker that reported to me. It was not something I wanted to do. Let's be realistic. It was not thing I wanted to do because as human beings, we hate confrontation. There are other people who love confrontation, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. People who are angry and people who love confrontation. But most of us don't like confrontation, and so we avoid reprimanding and disciplining our subordinates. And not only do we not only avoid confrontation at work, but quite often we avoid confrontation at home. And we do not discipline our kids and we don't reprimand them. But here the Bible is saying, discipline your children and they will give you peace. Because here's the thing, if you don't correct the kids when they are little and they get away with it, what happens is they think, oh, I'm not going to get punished. I can do whatever I want and I'll get away with it. And they grow up with that mentality, that philosophy, and they eventually get into trouble, do some crime or something else, and they run into the law and they have to pay a penalty. But if you discipline them while they were little and you correct their behavior, they learn from it and they will bring you delight when they're older, they're teenagers and young adults and such, and they turn out to be good people. I want to hook the next verse after that, verse 19. You notice I went 15, 17, 19. It says, servants cannot be corrected by mere words. Though they understand, they will not respond. And there are times that we have to and I'm talking about kids discipline, anybody that are subordinates. How do we discipline them? Do we call them in? I remember, as I mentioned, I was a new supervisor. I had to call my subordinate in and tell him, hey, this is the way I want things done. And, if you don't do it this way, there's consequences, etc. And the thing is, if you don't correct them, or if you just do it by mere words, and there's no consequences, if you do it by just mere words, they understand the words, but they will not respond unless you really have some bite in your correction. And I want to hook that now to verse 21. A servant pampered from youth will turn out to be insolent. And it's not just servants, but I'm talking about kids, grandkids, subordinates, people who report to anybody. If a person is pampered and when they do something wrong, oh, it's not their fault. And I know some parents are like that, they're so young, they don't understand. We make up excuses. And I know grandparents, especially, it always amazes me when I see grandparents. And I know in a few years I will be one. But I'll use my mother as an example. When I was a kid, she would discipline me left and right. And then the woman had grandkids, and they would do some of the same things I did. And she'd go, oh, they're so young, And I've not only seen it with my mother, but I've seen it with other grandparents. And I hope and pray that I don't turn out that way. But here's the thing. The best thing we can do for our kids and our grandkids is to make sure if they do something wrong, correct them. And I don't mean correcting them like, I remember as a kid, we used to go visit my grandfather on the farm. He lived off on the farm. And in order for, whenever there was discipline, he'd send you outside. And I'm sure many people have this story, especially older people, where your mother or your grandmother would send you outside to the tree to get your own twitch or, to beat you with. But, this is what my grandfather did. He would send the person out, go get me a twitch or a stick, and off that tree. And, I want a nice limber one. And you cut it and bring it in, and then he'll whip you with it. I'm not talking about corporal punishment. I'm talking about discipline a person. And disciplining them means A, first, talking to them, letting them understand that what they did was wrong. And B, that if they do it again, there's consequences. A best example that I have is my wife was great at this with my two kids. Whenever they misbehaved, the first thing was she talked with them, say, do you understand? If they repeat that infraction, from that talk, she said, if you do it again, you will get time out. And I remember my youngest daughter would end up in timeout, and normally it was her nose in the corner. And, and then if she did the same thing again, Not only did she get time out, but she lost certain privilege. And my wife had a progressive discipline system. A progressive discipline system. And it wasn't beating the kid. It was letting the kid understand this behavior have this consequence, and continuing this behavior have this consequence plus this consequence. And I was amazed, especially coming from my family. You stepped out of line and it was a quick belt, a whack. Progressive discipline. Because all the whack did was, I learned to be out of reach, or, but I suffered the consequence. It was immediate, but I went around but the progressive discipline from my wife, my kids would realize after a while, the problem was time in the corner got longer. The things that were taken away got more severe, and that maybe that particular thing is not worth the consequence. And that's the point that I want for us to make, is discipline. It says, verse 15, 17, 19, and 21, a rod and a reprimand impart wisdom, but a child left undisciplined disgraces its mother. Discipline your children, and they will give you peace. They will bring you the delight you desire. Children and servants cannot be corrected by mere words. Though they understand, they will not respond. And that's what my wife understood. She talked with them, but she also disciplined them with this progressive discipline system. And finally, children and servants pampered from youth will turn out to be insolent. And I see a lot of insolent teenagers and young people today. And part of the problem is not the kid themselves, but the parents did not discipline them. And I know what I'm talking about, because as a counselor, as a pastor, I've had people come in to me and say, oh, my teenager, they're acting out, they are so da-da-da. And I've known these people for years. And now that the kid had grown up to be a teenager, and they did something that was severe enough to get into trouble with the law, their parents now turn to me as a chaplain and a pastor, help us, give us good advice. Your kids are so good. How did you? And I wanted to tell them the reason my kids are good was because when they were little, we disciplined them and we corrected them, and they knew there was consequences for their behavior. Unfortunately, you did not discipline your child. You thought, look at them, they're little, they're, and over time they said, oh, well, there's no consequences, and it just got bigger and bigger, and finally it caught up with you. The best thing for us to do is to correct bad behavior early rather than later. And that was my main theme for today. If you haven't caught that, I used up most of our time. So let's go back and talk about the other things. Theme that we see over and over. By justice a king give a country stability, but those who are greedy for bribes tear it down. We see over and over again the same theme is repeated. Verse 9. If a person, over and over we've seen that particular theme. Skip down to verse 9. If a wise person goes to court with a fool, the fool rages and scoffs, and there is no peace. Skipping down to verse 11. Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise being calm in the end. And one of the worst things I've seen is, as I mentioned, I spent 26 years in the federal prison system, and I saw a lot of fools, both staff and inmate. And the worst thing to do is try to go and to solve a problem with a fool. As a matter of fact, I finally got to the point, because we had a discipline system in the prison system where inmates can ask staff to be their staff rep when they were going to be disciplined. And as a chaplain, obviously they would ask me a lot, hey, chaplain, help me out, represent me. And as a person that was wise and conscientious, I would go to court with a fool, and I'd explain to them what to do and what not to do and how to, And the fact that there are fools, they open their mouth and they do just the opposite. As a matter of fact, fools rage and scoff, and there's no peace. And the fool give full vent to their rage. And no matter how much you try to help a fool, because they are foolish and they are angry and etc., they give full vent to their rage. You can't help them. Skipping from that verse to verse 22. An angry person stirs up conflict, and a hot-tempered person commits many sins. And I know this is a theme we talked about a few Proverbs back, but here's the thing. It looks like people who are fools and hot-tempered go along. It seems like that it's a characteristic that they have together. And as I mentioned, I would be a staff rep for a fool every once in a while because they ask me to represent them. And I give them good advice. I tell them what not to do and, how to behave. And the moment they go into where they are being, disciplined, they revert back to being fools. And that's the problem that you see is fools, even with good advice, revert back to being who they are, which are fools, and they rage, they scoff, they bring no peace, and eventually a hot-tempered person do commit many sins. Verse 12, if a ruler listens to lie, all his officials become wicked. That talks about leadership again. As leaders, if we listen to the wrong people and listen to the wrong advice, and then you act upon the people who give bad advice, if the ruler listens to the people who give bad advice, then all the people who give good advice will go, well, why should we say anything? Because he won't listen to us, he will only listen. And I have seen this. I've over the 27 years in the 26 years in the federal prison system, I've had good wardens and bad wardens. And the good wardens listened to everybody, and then they found out who was trustworthy and who weren't, who were good, and listened to advice and made decision. The bad wardens usually ended up listening to people who would lie to them and give them what they wanted to hear. And after a while, all their officials become wicked because, and what I mean by that is the good people stop giving advice. They stop hanging around. Why? Because there were consequences. As I'm talking, I'm thinking of one particular warden I had. After a while, as a chaplain, because I knew he was a fool, he was he did not listen to good advice. As a matter of fact, it turned out that he was an alcoholic, and he hung around with people like himself, other alcoholics, and the Bureau of Prison is famous to have a lot of people who drink. And so the people who listened to were the people who drank and were his buddies, and they lie and they did all these things. And after a while, the good workers, the good people, quit hanging around or giving advice. And I have to say that all officials do become wicked because of that. And I was guilty, as I mentioned. I spent 26 years, and what happened was, after a while, when I had a bad warden, I just avoided them. And for my own self-protection at time, but here's the thing. I avoided them and did not give them the good advice that they needed to hear. So, we'll move on from that. Verse 13. The poor and the oppressed have this in common. The Lord gives sight to the eyes of both. One of the things that we have heard over and over in Proverbs is that no matter who you are, the poor, the oppressed, the rich, young, old, have this in common. And what they have in common is the Lord gives sight to both eyes. And what that verse is implying and is teaching us is no matter who you are, rich, young, poor, God is ultimately God. And he's the one that gives us sight and gives us understanding and gives us everything. He's in charge. I want to skip now to verse 18 and 20, and that's where we're going to end today. Where there is no revelation, people cast off restraint. But blessed is the one who heeds wisdom instruction. This is a very interesting verse for me. A very interesting proverb. It says, where there is no revelation, people cast off restraint. And we see this, as I mentioned, where there are cycles in history, where people are for living life with no constraint. And I think back, since I was a kid in the 60s, we had the 60 women's rights and all these different things. We had the 70s and 80s, and how we have gone up and down in the cycle of church life, of life in general, etc. And what the scripture is saying, where there's no revelation, where people don't have, can see what is right and good, and where there's no church and there's no consequences for things and such, they cast off restraint. And when they do that, we see that, and we've seen this at churches, when there's constraint and there's revelation and there's preaching, and the church grows. When there's no revelation and such, the church declines. The same is true for families, the same is true for countries, etc. 100 years ago, America went through this cycle, and let me explain. We had the coronavirus today. If you go back, we called it the Spanish flu, 1918. We had literally hundreds of thousands of people died of that flu pandemic. Pandemic is nothing new. But then we had what we call the what? Roaring 20s. When they cast off revelation, they cast off God, they cast off the church, they cast off discipline, they cast off all these things. When people cast off discipline and wisdom and revelation, things go bad. And our country went through the roaring 20s. And then we had what after that? Depression. And those things are cyclical. At least from my view, we see it in the Bible with the people of Israel, where a new generation rose up, did what God's will, then another generation didn't, then a new generation grew up and did God's will, and then the following generation didn't. Well, part of the problem is because parents do not teach their kids. Where there's no revelation, where we have no instruction and teaching, people will cast off restraint. And so, going back to my first point, we need to teach and discipline our kids and ourselves, because it starts at the home. Our country stands, and the foundation of a nation is really the family. And so, where there's no revelation, people cast off at restraint. But, and this is the part I want, but blessed is the one who heeds wisdom instruction. And we've been studying Proverbs now for 29 weeks. And ultimately, what it is all about is we need to seek wisdom. We need to to seek God's will, God's instruction, God's ways. Looking at verse 20, just the opposite advice is given. Do you see someone who speaks in haste? There's no hope. There's more hope for a fool than them. There's more hope for a fool than them. Wisdom, smart people don't speak in haste. As a matter of fact, the one that usually have the, jump off and give an answer right away are the ones that are fools. And they're worse than a fool. They don't even know they're fools. We'll end with this. Verse 23. Pride brings a person low, but the lowly in spirit gain honor. Reminds me of the Beatitude. We have heard this before. Pride goes before a fall. Pride brings a person low. People who are pride, and by that mean that they're self-absorbed and they think that they have all the answers, they will be brought low. But if you have a low spirit, if you have a teachable spirit, if you have a spirit where you need God, as I mentioned in the Sermon on the Mount, I know it was on a Sunday, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It's only people who are spiritually poor, or people who realize that they are humble enough and are lowly in spirit, that they gain honor. For me, that means several things. First, it means we need to have a teachable spirit. We need to have a teachable spirit. In order for us to gain wisdom or to gain anything, the first and foremost thing is we need to have that humility of spirit, to be humble enough to learn and be teachable. A person who knows it all is not teachable. And I hope and pray as we have been studying Proverbs that we have that humility and that humble spirit and have that teachableness where we can gain wisdom. Unfortunately, fools, people who speak in pace, people who are hot-tempered, they don't have that humility. And that's why they are. And for us as Christians, I know for me, I tell people I am on a lifelong journey to learn, to be teachable, to grow. Unfortunately, a lot of people thought that their education ended after 12th grade or when they left school, whatever year that was. But we as Christians know, as I mentioned, I've been reading the Bible for 40 plus years now. And I still encounter things I do not know and have never seen before. I read it before, I never saw it. But here's the thing, it's having that teachable spirit, having that humility to say, God, what new revelation do you have for me? Because where there's no revelation, the Bible says the people perish. And where there's no revelation, people cast off constraint, and that's why they perish. We'll end with that today. I know we went a little bit over. Have a Merry Christmas. Again, service tomorrow, 5 for Ottertail, 6:30 for Richville. And I will see y'all next week.